Act and fuel containment are two solid reasons why the Congressional Relief Act is necessary, and I proudly stand with my colleagues in this effort to scale back rogue agencies such as the EPA in order to restore congressional intent to the regulations that are being produced. No longer should we let the tail wag the dog. And yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for your comment, and I'm sure there's got to be some people that are listening to this that want to say, did he really say regulate dust?
Absolutely
yes,
right.
There is a proposed rule to regulate dust. Now, this rule actually exists in the state of California, which is closest to bankruptcy of any state in this country. And the Central Valley of California has had an issue about water and the shortage of water in the Central Valley, one of the breadbaskets of the entire nation, because of a debate over water. Until it started to rain, they've been dry as a powder keg. But they have the dust regulation in California. So we inquired of them, what do you do if you've got a gravel road going up to your farmhouse to keep the dust down? Well, we have to water it every day. We have to take this shortage water that we don't have enough with to even grow a clump of spinach, and we water our road so we don't violate our local Clean Air Act in California. And I got humorous about that because I went to school in at Texas Tech in Texas. And although we have come a long way up on the South Plains of Texas in reducing the amount of dust storms that have been on up in the panhandle of Texas, we still have dust storms. And when I was at Texas Tech, we had dust storms that were so bad that if you drove into the wind, they would literally sandblast the front paint off of your car. Now, I want to know what the fine's going to be and who's going to have to pay the fine when dust blowing in all the way from New Mexico and Arizona comes blowing into your state, and who is the EPA going to punish? I haven't got a good idea, but the chances are the farmer.
Absolutely.
And that's the real tragedy here. Certainly, there's particles in the air are bad for folks like me who have asthma, and we have to be concerned about it. And we're not going to let people overproduce any kind of disaster. But to say you can produce no dust on a farm is pretty close to crazy. Just turn of a plow creates dust.
Absolutely.
Just the driving of the pickup to the barn creates dust. And I think it's a little overreaching. You know, I was talking about this $600 fee that you got to have to be a volunteer. I tried to think of one that everybody might realize, and I thought of a good one. Everybody's got a school board in their state somewhere, a local school board, and generally these local school boards are either they're wanting to have a tax increase or they're wanting to float a bond issue or something like that. So they create these volunteer groups called Friends of the School Board who go out in the community and try to help the school board get this bond passed so they can have better schools for the children of that school district. Everybody experiences that across this whole nation, and every member of this Congress probably knows something about that. But under this new proposed regulation, every one of those volunteers that goes out and promotes the bond issue would have to pay $600 federal fine to get a license to talk about the bond issue, as if they were some kind of financial advisor to the American public. And what we really have there is a new revenue source created by the bureaucrats to put more money in the coffers of their various of their bureau or their agency. That's the kind of thing that makes no sense. My secretary was bragging on the fact that she thought the county commissioner was going to appoint her to this volunteer board. And I said, well, you better get a check ready for $600. And she said, well, no, it doesn't pay anything. I said, yeah, and by the way, the regulation also says that the person who the entity that appoints you to that board cannot pay your $600 for you. You have to pay it because you are now a financial advisor because that board has the ability to issue bonds. Now, that's just a little bit too much. And that's the kind of thing that we ought to, You know, I had an old cowboy back in Texas made a comment to me. He said, "We don't have very many shortages in this country, but the one shortage we got in Washington, D.C. is we had a severe shortage, dang near a drought," as he put it, in common sense.
Amen.
And part of the reason we have the Congressional Review Act is so that hopefully the common sense of the representatives of the people can prevail in these issues that are going to either harm our individual constituents, cost us jobs, or drive industries offshore, overseas, as we would with the cement manufacturers if we impose these severe penalties upon people who produce Portland cement. And Portland cement doesn't mean it's from Portland. It means it's a process that they use to make cement. So today we're talking about what I think is something that the American people, now that they hopefully know a little bit about how much the agencies of this country and the bureaucrats and the secretaries and all the people that follow them, of all the cabinet members in this executive branch, the kind of power they have to change the life of the individual and the life of the job producers and the job seekers in this country. And if we are going to give them that kind of control and that kind of power over people's individual lives, over employers' ability to make the profit necessary to hire and create new jobs, if we're going to allow them to have that power, just like anything else, someone has to have oversight over these people and take a look at what they're doing and see if it is to the good of the American people and the good of our country. And that's why we have the Congressional Review Act. And in that Congressional Review Act, we get the chance to look at it. Just because it hasn't been used, but rarely, does not mean it shouldn't be used when the number of regulations have grown by geometric progressions in the last 2 years. When we create one bill, the health care bill that was created in the last session of Congress, creates 40 entities with rulemaking authority, 40 new entities that can create rules that affect the individual life and the health care of the American people. We have one particular entity that will actually be able to say what treatment can and cannot be given to certain people. Surely this House would want to at least take a look at those regulations, because it might mean life or death to an American citizen if we do not allow that. So it's important. Have you come to join us on this? Well, grab a microphone. Ms. Elmers, we'd love to have you. Right there. Well, give us your chart. Come on up here. Where is it? Which one is it? Is this it? All right. We've probably got about 5 or 10 minutes.
Yes, the gentleman has about 10 minutes.
10 minutes. All right. Won't you take a microphone and bring your chart up here, and we'll hear from you. All right. Congresswoman Elmers from North Carolina, we are pleased to have you here.
Thank you.
And we'd like you to explain what you want to show us here today.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Speaker. Today I rise on behalf of the people of Gardner, North Carolina. They are faced with a very difficult situation these days, one that is threatening and actually, as we speak, basically shutting Gardner down for business. As you can see from the chart, I'll point out the red line there. That red line is essentially going through the town of Garner, North Carolina. It is an extension of Highway 540. And this is the proposed site from the Army Corps of Engineers. And as you can see, if you look at the chart, there are some other very colorful options to consider as well. However, those options go through areas of wetlands and things. And the area that goes through Garner, North Carolina, that's the option that they're looking at because it's the only option that is outside of any wetlands and out of any areas that would harm such things as the dwarf wedge mussels. Now, basically what we're faced with today is a situation where Garner, North Carolina is shut down for business. Right now, businesses are not, potential businesses wanting to relocate or set up shop or move to the area, individuals maybe wanting to move to Garner, North Carolina, are reconsidering that choice because they see that there's a potential highway going through the center of their community, which is kind of a ridiculous situation. Many of the organizations that are involved right now have all said that this is not really a viable option, and yet we continue to look at it. We continue to allow Garner, North Carolina, to be shut down for business, potential loss of jobs. We have individuals that live in Garner, such as Brenda and Jerry Summer, who are an elderly couple that have children and grandchildren who have moved back to Garner to be near them, and they have the threat of having that highway go right through the middle of their living room. We also are faced with a situation, Springfield Baptist Church. There for 140 years, 2,000 parishioners. They will literally lose their church and 50 acres of land. This is continuing because of the Clean Water Act and basically the Army Corps of Engineers' refusal to remove the red line from consideration. We've met with them. We've asked them to take that option off the table and to save the American taxpayers that expense of doing the study. They know it's not a viable option. They know it's going to hurt business. They know that there are potential other options there, and yet we continue to look at it. I have the utmost respect for the Army Corps of Engineers, but quite frankly, this is a waste of American taxpayers' money and potential threat to business continuing in Garner, North Carolina, all so that we can preserve a mussel, all so that we can preserve and route around wetlands. You can go anywhere in North Carolina and it's pretty much considered a wetland, except your developed areas that are already in progress. I'm not against the highway, the loop being finished, but certainly there are other options that can be looked at. You can see there's an orange line, a blue line, a pink line. They're all there. They all connect, and these are all viable options. Some of the other organizations that are involved in this are the North Carolina Turnpike Authority, who has already dropped 3 other options from consideration because of public protests in those towns about potential harm to the community. Garner stands to lose a project worth of $9 million in investments and hundreds of jobs. Investors are literally walking away while the town stands in limbo because of this potential project that's going to take place here. We cannot continue this. This is what is happening. We must stand for the people of Garner, North Carolina. We must stand for the people of America who are continuously saying, let's use common sense. That's the issue here today, common sense. If we all know this is not going to be the project that's ultimately proposed, let's take it off the table. Let's not spend American taxpayer dollars. Let's preserve the business community of Garner, North Carolina, and all those folks, those good folks there who are potentially going to lose their homes. Let's do it now. Let's not wait. This is a ridiculous situation, and I think the American people have had just about enough of it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, so much for allowing me to stand for the people of Garner, North Carolina today.
The gentlelady would yield for a question. So if I'm understanding you correctly, the main reason for this route is because of the Clean Water Act and Endangered Species Act.
Yes, that is correct.
To disrupt, is that a mussel you're saying?
It is. It is a particular mussel Let me find the name again, just so you're familiar with it. It is the dwarf wedge mussel, and apparently that dwarf wedge mussel is found down in the wetlands of the lower area there. So they have avoided that area, and then there are some other wetlands that are there as well. You know, certainly there are ways that we can work around these issues and not go through an entire town that has been developed for years and years.
This is town right here.
That is right there, yes,
Well,
sir.
it's going to go in and condemn basically all the town.
Go right through the very middle of it.
Yeah, I can see why folks are a little upset about that.
Well, it is, and the thing is it's the potential for that highway to go through there. But right now, as we speak, the town of Garner is basically stuck. There's no growth. There's none whatsoever, because any potential business, any potential job that could be coming there is turning away from Garner, North Carolina, for this very reason.
I can understand that. So if I'm a potential employer that wants to build a factory, and that's one of the places I might look at, I look at this and say, wait a minute, I could buy the land, build my building, and then here comes the Corps of Engineers and puts a highway right through the middle of my building.
Absolutely.
I think I'll wait, or better yet, I'll look someplace else.
I'll just look somewhere else. And that's what's happening. And this is why the people of Garner, North Carolina are outraged, and rightfully so. This has been a situation now that has been hanging for a while, and it needs to be addressed. It needs to be addressed today. And I have asked that all entities involved, all areas, let's all look at this, use some common sense, and make the right choices. And let's save the American taxpayers some money.
This is a good, these regulations should be looked at by this House if they are available to be looked at. Of course, some of these may be long since on the books before we add this tool to examine regulations as they come out. But still, it's good for you as the representative of your folks in your district to come up and speak for the people, because that's our job.
That is.
I'm going to reclaim my time because I think we're about to run out of it, and I want to thank the Speaker for this hour, and I realize that I have like less than a minute left, so I'll yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. At this time, under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5, 2011, the Chair recognizes the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Burton, for 30 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, one of the things that the American people are really upset about right now is gasoline is $3.50 cents. In some parts of the country, it's up close to $4 a gallon. And the President of the United States and his administration, for whatever reason, is obstructing our ability to become energy independent. Last February, on February the 17th, U.S. District Judge Martin Feldman, who gave the Department of the Interior information on the deepwater drilling in the Gulf of Mexico earlier, he gave the administration 30 days to rule 7 deepwater drilling permits okay, to approve them. And he overturned the ban that was put in place in June of 2010 that allowed the government to arbitrarily impose a moratorium that would cause irreparable harm to businesses along the Gulf Coast. In fact, it'll cost as many as 24,000 jobs. But the thing about it that really concerns me is we have the ability to become energy independent within a relatively short period of time. Everybody would like to see us move toward alternative sources of energy and clean burning fuels to help the environment. I don't think anybody opposes that. The problem is, in the process, do we want to become more energy dependent on the rest of the world? Now, we get between 25 and 30% of our energy from the Middle East. And anybody who's been watching the news at all knows that there's a war going on in Libya. Egypt is in turmoil. Bahrain is having problems. There's potential problems in Jordan and in Saudi Arabia. Now, if something goes wrong over there, and Iran is trying to undermine us by under the covers doing everything they can to stop us from getting energy and to put us in a trick bag, if the Suez Canal is bottled up, if the Straits of Hormuz are closed or the Persian Gulf's closed, we're going to lose or could have substantially delayed as much as 30% of our energy. And you can imagine what that would do to this place. And the prohibition against drilling in the Gulf of Mexico takes away about 11% of our energy. And the President won't allow us to have permits in that area. Now, he says that he's concerned about it because of the environmental damage that was done by the oil spill down there when the derrick blew up. What isn't said is that the tankers that come from the Middle East and from South America spill more oil than that environmental tragedy that took place in the Gulf spilled. People don't realize that. Now, we can drill in an environmentally safe way, and we can do it in a number of places in this country and move rapidly toward energy independence. We can drill up in Alaska, in the Anwar, and people say in the environmental community, well, we're worried about the bears up there and the small animals and so forth. I've been up there. Does anybody have any idea how big Alaska is? It's 3.5 times the size of Texas. And there's only 500,000, 600,000 people that live in Alaska. And all the rest of that is wilderness except where we're drilling. And if we drill in the Anwar, we could produce a great amount of oil and energy that would make us less dependent on Saudi Arabia, the Middle East, and on the communist dictator in Venezuela, Mr. President Chavez. And so we are not doing what we should to make sure that we provide energy for this country and make sure that the cost of energy is low so that people can afford it, so employers can afford to hire more people and produce more goods that can be sold here and around the world. And the President, for whatever reason, is blocking this. I just can't understand why. But I think the American people need to know that, and they need to be talking to the President, the administration, and other congressmen and senators about this, because we're going to see if everything goes south over in the Middle East, or if the President of Venezuela decides to cut us off, we're going to see oil prices go up, 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 and the cost of gasoline go to $3, $4, $5, $6 a gallon. It's already over $3.50. And if it gets to $6 a gallon, it's going to have a devastating impact on this economy. In fact, it already is having a devastating impact. If you talk to 18-wheeler truckers, the people that haul goods and services all across this country, they'll tell you that they can't afford to keep their prices for trucking our goods and services low if the price of diesel fuel goes above $4 by very much a gallon. And yet it is above $4 a gallon right now, and it's trending higher. And if we have a problem in the Middle East or in the Gulf or in South America, wherever we get oil, it's going to have a tremendous impact not only on our ability to buy gasoline at the pump, to provide oil for heating, for our electrical companies to provide electricity to keep our lights on, but it's going to cost us more when we go to Walmart, when we go to the grocery store, wherever we go to buy goods, foods, and services, because the truckers who truck those goods across the country are going to have to pay more for their fuel, and they pass that along to the consumer in higher prices. So this has a devastating impact on our economy because we depend too much on foreign oil. Now, another thing I think everybody in this country ought to know, Mr. Speaker, is we have the largest reserves of coal in the world, which could be converted into oil if we use coal to liquid technology, and we could get as many as 5 million barrels of oil a day in the not-too-distant future. And the amount of oil that we could get out of coal shale is up to 8 trillion barrels of oil. 8 trillion barrels of oil. In North and South Dakota, they just found one of the biggest oil reserves in the whole world that we could use to bring down the price of energy in this country. But we can't drill there, because the President and the administration and the Environmental Protection Agency and the Department of Energy is blocking that. Now, I know a lot of people around the country say, well, we've got to be concerned about the environment, and we do. And we ought to be transitioning into these other technologies. But that's going to take 10, 15, 20 years. To get a nuclear plant up takes forever because you have to go through all the permits, all the governmental regulations. Sure, we could get there, but it's going to take time. And in that interim period, we are dependent on fossil fuels, and we're getting those from the Middle East and South America and from the Gulf of Mexico when we can drill there. So it's extremely important, Mr. Speaker, that we pay attention to this and send a very strong signal to the administration that it's time for us to get on with drilling here in the United States and becoming energy independent. Now, I want to talk about one more thing, Mr. Speaker, that I think is extremely important, and that deals with our southern border between us and Mexico. The President of Mexico told President Obama that he did not want any government agents from the United States, the FBI or our DEA, to be able to carry weapons when they're in Mexico. We just had one of our agents shot to death in Mexico about 2 weeks ago. It was one of our special drug agents that we had in Mexico, and they had no ability to defend themselves. One of them was killed. The other was severely wounded. And along the Texas-American border, we have all kinds of problems. We've had a Border Patrol agent just shot recently and killed. We have farmers all over the place and ranchers down there who are scared to death to go out of their houses because these people are coming across the border, drug dealers, people who are bringing illegal aliens in, and some of them are even selling their ranches. We have one fellow down there who's had a ranch in his family for over 100 years, 6,000 acres he's had, and he sold his farm. Joe Aguilar sold his ranch because he said he's had enough. They're going across his ranch every day. We had another rancher down there who found a cache of narcotics on his land. He turned it over to the Drug Enforcement Agency. Days later, thugs came into his house, beat him and his wife half to death, and said, if you do this again, we'll kill you. Now, how would you like to live in that kind of an environment? Well, you say, that's right on the border. That can't happen here. 80 miles north of the Mexican-American border, 80 miles into the United States right now, we have signs posted saying it's not safe for you as an American citizen to go south of here between that 80-mile marker and Mexico. Can you imagine that? Americans are afraid to even walk on the American soil because of drug dealers, thugs, illegal aliens, people who are transporting them into the country who might kill them. We had one Border Patrol agent who was shot and killed about a week ago, and when he was shot and killed, we found out that he was told these drug dealers or illegal aliens or people who were bringing illegals in to stop. And since they wouldn't stop, our Border Patrol agents were told they had to use bean bags. Get this. They had to use bean bags to be fired at these people who were across the border illegally, who may have been drug dealers or whatever. The fellows that they were pursuing turned around with AK-47s, an automatic weapon with high-velocity bullets, and shot and killed this one Border Patrol agent. And the President of the United States has told them that the first thing that they should use if they suspect somebody of bringing illegal drugs in and they can't get them to stop are these bean bags. Now, I can't imagine anything like that. These people are risking their lives day in and day out. Some of them are being killed, some are being taunted day in and day out, and they can't even defend themselves down there. And President Obama, along with the President of Mexico, agreed that our DEA agents, when they go across the border into Mexico, they can't even carry weapons. Now, how many people do you think that are trying to enforce our drug laws and are sent down into foreign countries to defend this country against drug dealers and drug cartels? How many do you think is going to want to go down into those areas when they can't even protect themselves? Would you want to do it? I wouldn't want to do it. I'd want to have a weapon so I could at least try to survive in the event they tried to kill me. But unfortunately, the President of the United States has just said in the last few days that he will not allow any of our agents, FBI, CIA, DEA, or any of them, to carry a weapon when they go into Mexico because the President of Mexico, Mr. Calderon, said that he doesn't think we should. Well, we're in a war down there on that border. You talk to the people in Texas, they will tell you there is a war between us and the drug dealers and the thugs that are coming across that line into our country. And there's a high suspicion that we're seeing Al-Qaeda and Taliban-type terrorists coming across the border into the United States as well. There was an article that was written just recently. I'd like to read part of it, Mr. Speaker. It says, in Texas, nearly 8,200 farms and ranches back up to the Mexican border. The men and women who live and work on those properties say they're under attack from the same drug cartels blamed for thousands of murders in Mexico. It's a war, make no mistake about it, the Texas Agricultural Commissioner Todd Staples said, and it's happening on American soil, in this country. Texas farmers and ranchers produce more cotton and more cattle than any other state in the Union. So Staples is concerned that this war could eventually impact our food supply and calls it a threat to our national security. To raise awareness, Commissioner Staples launched the website protectyourtexasborder.com. It's a place where frustrated and scared farmers and ranchers can share their stories. One Texas farmer who asked not to be identified said it's common for him to see undocumented immigrants and drug dealers coming across his property. He says, I see something, I just drive away, he said. It's a problem. I've learned to live with it, and pretty much I've become numb to it. Isn't that a sad commentary on this country? We can't even defend Americans in this country, in Texas and Arizona. Another farmer, Joe Aguilar, who I talked about earlier, said you have to either beat them or join them, and I decided to do neither, and he sold his farm of 6,000 acres that his family had for 100 years. Our farmers and ranchers can't afford their own security detail, Staples said. We're going to become more dependent on food and commodities from other countries if we don't do something about it. And the President sent 14,000 National Guard people or 17,000 National Guard people down to the Gulf of Mexico when that oil spill took place off National Guard troops down to the Texas-American border, which is 1,980 miles long. We're never going to solve that border problem unless we really realize that it is an area that we have to focus on, that it's a war, that our citizens are in danger down there, and we can't any longer allow drug dealers to have sites in the United States where they have binoculars and weapons so they can watch for the Border Patrol agents so they can tell their counterparts to bring drugs across the border or bring terrorists across the border because they know that the coast is clear. This is something that we can't tolerate, and we need to protect our border agents. They ought to have guns that they can use to stop these people. They shouldn't be shooting bean bags at them. And we certainly shouldn't be asking our CIA, DIA, DEA agents to go into Mexico to fight the drug dealers and find out what's going on and tell them they can't even have a weapon to protect themselves. This is insane. And the other thing I talked about earlier was the oil situation. It's insane for us to become more dependent on foreign energy at a time when our economy is foundering. We've still got unemployment at around 9%. Business people can't make plans because they don't know what their energy costs are. And the people who go to work are paying $3.50 to $4 for a gallon of gas. We can do better, and the President ought to do better. And I hope, Mr. Speaker, that the message will get to the White House loud and clear before it's just too late and our economy is hurt further. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5, 2011, the Chair recognizes now the gentleman from Iowa, Mr. King, for 30 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is, again, a privilege to be recognized to address you here on the floor of the House of Representatives, and it's a privilege to sit here in this chamber and listen to the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Burton, talk about these critical issues for the United States of America. And each of us that come down here on so many days come here for the purposes of bringing up these critical issues, informing you, Mr. Speaker. And while that's going on, there are people all across America that are listening in and deciding for themselves the priorities and deciding for themselves what kind of a job we're doing here in Congress. And I'm here. I'd love to step in on the immigration debate and burn up about 30 minutes talking about that. But, Mr. Speaker, I think to start out with, I need to have this discussion with you about Obamacare. And there's a fair number of different strategies that are working here in the House of Representatives, and perhaps a different number and a different strategy to some degree going on in the United States Senate. But the circumstances are this. Almost a year ago, Obamacare passed the United States Congress and was messaged to the President, where he eagerly signed the bill. It was a combination of legislative shenanigans that took place. The bill itself that came to the floor was not a product of committee. It was a bill that was written in Speaker Pelosi's by her staff in her office with who knows what input. And it was dropped on us in a fashion that didn't allow us an opportunity to evaluate it there, then, or on the spot. It was a combination of two bills. One of them was Obamacare as it went out of the House over to the Senate, and the Senate then promised, on the condition that Obamacare be passed, and the votes that were necessary to pass the basis of Obamacare were generated because the Senate decided that they would do, under a reconciliation plan, avoid the filibuster rules of a 60 votes in the Senate. They sent us a reconciliation plan that altered and amended Obamacare itself. And into that package was a promise from the President of the United States that he would issue an executive order that would take care of the concerns of the pro-life members, pro-life Democrats, who wouldn't vote for Obamacare as long as it funded abortion. And so the audacity of the President of the United States to take the position that he could amend legislation that passed this Congress by executive order, which is not a constitutional position, Mr. Speaker, but that audacity was swallowed by enough people that they voted Obamacare out of the House marginally. The reconciliation package that came from the Senate squeaked out of there because of the promises that were made, and came over here and was passed because of the promises that were made, and the final cap on it was the President's executive order that was supposed to amend Obamacare. And what do we have in all of this mess? 2,500 or so pages that is so convoluted that if anybody in this Congress, any lawyers out there that propose to be experts, anybody that's staff for Energy and Commerce or former Speaker Pelosi or anybody else out here, I don't think there's a single person on the planet, no matter how good their background, no matter how intelligent, no matter how well read, no matter how many research books they might have to work with, if you would shut them in an office and cut the wires and the wireless to the outside world, not a single person out of these 6+ billion people on this planet could read Obamacare and be able to analyze all that it does, nor its implications on the lives of 300+ million Americans. It's not possible to do so. We did, I think, a very good job of analyzing what it was in broad terms. Some of us knew going in that there was deceptive language written into Obamacare that automatically appropriated funds that would be set up the implementation of Obamacare, even if Congress appropriated no money to it, that would put the implementation in place and churn it on in perpetuity, Mr. Speaker. And some of that information, I believe, came out of some of the members of the Energy and Commerce Committee that had been analyzing this bill last fall, and I believe that we had some verbal discussions on it, not here on the floor necessarily, but on the side conversations that I had with some of the better informed members of this Congress. They aren't all here any longer in this 112th Congress. But as we came into January, I'm thinking about how we unfund Obamacare. And it's been my argument all along, Mr. Speaker, that the strategy that is this. At first, a lot of us used all of our energy to do the best we could to kill Obamacare. And in spite of all of that, in spite of the tens of thousands of people that came from every single state in the Union to come in here and surround this Capitol and tell them, keep your hands off of my health care, still, the former Speaker of the House marched through the crowds with her oversized gavel in her let-them-eat-cake moment and imposed Obamacare on America. Shortly after the moment that vote went up on the board, I went down to the people that had, and I say surrounded this Capitol, it wasn't just a human chain around the Capitol, it was a human donut around the Capitol. It was 6 and 8 people deep, all the way around the United States Capitol, unbroken human donut around the Capitol, with thousands of people left over in the corners, so to speak. If you envision a circle, there isn't one, I understand. But they were standing in clusters by the thousands, still not part of that human donut. They came here and said, keep your hands off of our health care. That bill finally passed, and I hear on the floor, and there's message to the Senate, and I went down with that group, as did Michelle Bachmann and several others. Pete Hoekstra of Michigan comes to mind as another individual that was back and forth communicating with the people that came here to peacefully petition the government for redress of grievances, exactly in line with the First Amendment of the Constitution. And I promised then, as did Michelle Bachmann, that I'll introduce legislation to repeal Obamacare. That happened the very next day, and it happened for us within 3 minutes of each other. And so I laid out, though, the strategy over the next few days and weeks to repeal Obamacare. And I'm going to refresh this now, Mr. Speaker, for the minds of those who are paying attention, and it's this, that first, all energy was focused on killing Obamacare. I didn't burn up 1 minute of media time that I can think of talking about what to do if it passed. And I remember people asking me out here in the crowd, what will you do if it passes? And my answer was, I'm focused on killing it. We'll worry about that. That's another subject for another time. I'm focused on killing it. Well, it did pass, and we turned the focus then on repealing it. And the beginning of that was at opening of business, actually same day, because this passed after midnight on a Sunday night, so it was Monday morning. This Congress opened for business at 9 o'clock. At that minute, there are 2 bill draft requests waiting in place to bring the legislation to repeal Obamacare. Then I began to lay out this strategy, which was get as many co-sponsors on the repeal as possible. And as that number grew, sometime in June or towards the summer, I introduced a discharge petition. That discharge petition was designed to gain 218 signatures. With that, the Speaker of the House, and no one can block it, it must come to the floor, no amendments, for an up or down vote. Well, we got to 178 signatures on the discharge petition, which is pretty good. I believe that number was 178. In any case, I question that because there were 6 Republicans that did not sign it, but all but 6 signed it. And we had 1 Democrat that signed it, so I guess that takes it down there, maybe 173 looks more like the number. And I just correct that for the record, Mr. Speaker. Let that be 173 signatures on the discharge petition. We were working for 218 is the point. And yet, the discharge petition, that if it had been brought to the floor, would have been voted on and could have been, and like I say, could have passed, and if it had been forced to the floor under a discharge petition, it would have passed, and we would have repealed Obamacare from the House then. But it always was a way to get people on record so we knew who was for repeal of Obamacare and who was unwilling to go on record for repeal of Obamacare, and it always was something that candidates for Congress could look at that and challenge the individual that they were running against. Why didn't you sign the discharge petition? You're really against Obamacare? Your name's not on there. And it was useful for a good number of candidates, and some of them have said they wouldn't be here in this Congress today if they didn't have the discharge petition to measure their opponent with. So it always had a utility in 2 ways, seeking to repeal Obamacare and putting a marker down so that the American public could discern who's for Obamacare and who's against it and who's afraid to take a position. All that was taking place last summer, all the way on up through August, September, October, and into the election on the 2nd day of November, where through the summer, continuing the strategy was not just the discharge petition, it was use it and other things, win the majority here in the House. When we have the majority in the House, then we can bring the repeal of Obamacare. And I said for a long time, repeal of Obamacare needs to be H.R. 1. That's the highest priority for the Speaker of the House. The Speaker traditionally gets the first 10 bills to name, H.R. 1 through H.R. 10. And you can look at the priority by the number. So number 1, I believe, needed to be the repeal of Obamacare as the highest priority, Mr. Speaker. Well, it turned out that H.R. 2 was the repeal of Obamacare. All right, there's no complaint on my part. That's a very high priority in any case. And when we did pass the repeal of Obamacare, consistent with the strategy that I laid out way last summer, And then, way last summer, I was making the case that no money can be spent by the federal government unless the House of Representatives agrees to it. We can shut off all funding to Obamacare here in the House of Representatives. And if the Senate disagrees and the House says no, then no money gets spent by the federal government until we reach an agreement. That's what's going on right now, Mr. Speaker. So I argued then and I argue now that part of this strategy to undo Obamacare has to be to unfund Obamacare, to defund Obamacare, to phrase it a little bit differently. And it was always part of the strategy going back almost a year. And as we move forward to defund Obamacare, we need to understand that there were automatic appropriations that were written into Obamacare. And that's part of the dialogue that was going on last fall in a very quiet little way, but no one had drilled into it that I know of and looked at all of the pieces on our side. On the other side, they wrote it in. So I'd like to hear from someone who was involved in that on the Democrat side. I'd like to hear from former Speaker Pelosi, or maybe I'd like to hear from the whip, Steny Hoyer. Did they know it was in there? Of course they did. Did they direct their staff to write it in there? Probably. Who on that staff devised this strategy to put in all of these threads that add up to $105.5 billion? I would like to know the answer to that question, and that will emerge over time as history has a way of uncovering these things. But in any case, the automatic funding was there. Another way to phrase it would be self-enacting funding was there. And I drafted language to cut off the funding to Obamacare, patterned off of the funding that was shut off that put an end to the Vietnam War. And I'm confident that's in the congressional record and in the media record sometime back. But about 5 or so years ago, I got curious as to how I remembered the Vietnam War being ended versus what actually happened. And I went back and read the congressional record and the debate on that, Mr. Speaker. And the congressional record reveals this. There were about 3 different places, and perhaps more, but we uncovered 3 different places in appropriations bills where Congress shut off the funding to carry out the war in Vietnam. It began in 1973. The most significant was on a continuing resolution in the spring of 1974. And as I read through that language, maybe 5 years ago, it gave me an inspiration on how to bring language to shut off the funding to Obamacare. And I'm going to go from memory here. It's in the congressional record, but so it won't be precisely accurate, but it's thematically will be right. The language that was written into a continuing resolution in the spring of 1974 that shut off the American support in the war in Vietnam reads close to this. Notwithstanding any other provision of law, no funds in this act and no funds in any act heretofore appropriated shall be used for offensive or defensive operations in the land of Vietnam, in the skies over it, the seas adjacent to it, or in the adjacent countries, and it names at least Laos and Cambodia along the side. And I believe they also said Thailand. But it named the countries next to it, and it said no funds shall be used for offensive or defensive operations, Vietnam, the skies over it, seas adjacent to it, or the countries adjacent to it, and no funds in any act heretofore appropriated shall be used for such purpose. In other words, whatever money was in the pipeline got shut off. They shut off all involvement. And you can imagine, and I don't know it to be factually true, Mr. Speaker, that there were bullets and grenades and munitions that were being unloaded on the dock at Da Nang that were loaded back up again on the ship and hauled away. And I don't know that to be fact, but figuratively, that's what happened. They shut off everything with language written into a continuing resolution. They shut off a war here in the United States Congress. Now, if we can shut off a war here in the United States Congress and stop all the money that's in the pipeline and any money that might be coming at the same time, and all the funds that are in the Act, none of them can be used to conduct the operations in Vietnam, we can sure in the world, in a continuing resolution, write legislation that will shut off all of this automatic funding that was written into Obamacare. How could anyone imagine that somehow, because the Congressional Research Services defined the spending that is automatic spending here in the Obamacare Act, they called it mandated appropriations and fund transfers. Mandated appropriations and fund transfers have been defined by some folks as mandatory spending. And then they go on to argue that mandatory spending cannot be addressed in an appropriations bill. I would remind them this is the United States Congress, and the former majority in this Congress wrote all this into a bill. And it's automatic funding, it's self-enacting funding. It's not completely unprecedented as a tactic, but it is completely unprecedented in its magnitude. And therefore, this Congress can't be hiding behind a rule or defining a piece of legislation as mandatory spending. We're not mandated by any previous Congress. No Congress can bind a subsequent Congress. If this House of Representatives says no, then no means no. And we sometimes have to remind the Senate over and over again, and we would have to do that under the proposal that I'm making. But I will tell you, Mr. Speaker, that this is an unconstitutional bill. It's been pushed through this Congress in an unprecedented fashion with a series of shenanigans that this country has never seen before. 2 federal courts have found it unconstitutional. Judge Vincent found it completely unconstitutional, and it's on its way through the circuit and to the Supreme Court, and it should be expedited directly to the Supreme Court, except the White House is holding the ball. The White House is holding the ball because their tactic is to try to get Obamacare implemented to the maximum amount before such time so that it becomes too late to pull it out by the roots. That's part of the tactic. So from the litigation standpoint, the unconstitutional components are the unconstitutional mandates, compelling states in violation of the 10th Amendment that they have to comply with an act to provide these services, and compelling individuals that they have to buy insurance even though they're not participating in the system whatsoever. That's never been done before. It's completely unprecedented, Mr. Speaker. And so we see the Obama administration now offering a little carrot out there to the states, to the governors, saying, we will waive the mandate for the states. Now, the caveat is you have to provide an equal or better policy yourself in order to be able to qualify for the waiver, and you've got till 2014 to do that. But that act, which likely won't come to any kind of fruition, is a means, I believe, to take away the argument that it's an unconstitutional mandate on the states. And the White House has also had language that came out a couple of weeks ago that they would consider or entertain the alteration or perhaps the elimination of the individual mandate. Now, that's the second component that might come out of the White House that would, if those 2 provisions were altered in practice, they can go before the Supreme Court and argue that it's not a constitutional violation because it's not really a mandate. And that's how they hope to walk through this thicket of constitutional prohibitions, and hopefully they can find a decision at the Supreme Court level that will allow them to impose Obamacare on the rest of America. That's their litigation tactic, Mr. Speaker. And their legislation tactic is this. The pressure that grows, they're trying to take the pressure off. And so when the House played into their hands a week or so ago by bringing legislation on the 1099 component of this outrageous requirement that people report to the IRS any cumulative transactions with any entity that meet or exceed $600 in a year, which means if you pay somebody to mow your lawn or you have to turn in a squeal form to the IRS. And this is something that was put into Obamacare, these extra requirements, because they were able to score it as, my memory is that it was $17 billion it was supposed to generate in taxes because the IRS was going to go in and audit these squeal forms, the 1099 forms. Well, in any case, that was the most objectionable component in the short term that came with Obamacare. Therefore, this House picked this up and sent it to the Senate. And what happens? The Democrats in the Senate are going to take it and send it to the President. Why? Because they think that people shouldn't be required to file the 1099 forms and they can find another place to come up with $17 billion? No, Mr. Speaker, that's not it. It's this. They understand that the objections to the 1099 squeal forms that were written into Obamacare are the most egregious of all in the short term, and they want to take the lid off the pressure cooker, let some steam out, put the lid back on, and they want to continue to frantically implement Obamacare with the $105.5 billion that are written into it, and the self-enacting automatic spending that are there. So, as the pressure builds against Obamacare, they're willing to take a little piece off here, lift the lid off the pressure cooker there, and drain that heat down so that they can hang on to the major components of Obamacare and get it implemented. And while we have a whole series of different initiatives that are going on around here, driven now by the new Republican majority, 5 different proposals within energy and commerce to change the language from mandatory spending to, I suppose, optional spending or something. All of those are authorization pieces of language. There is no leverage to get them passed. And if energy and commerce passes that legislation, it goes over to Harry Reid's desk, where it probably goes directly into the trash, not into the desk drawer. So we can't produce leverage to change the definition. We have to look at the leverage that we have, the leverage that we're gifted with, and it's this. This government it runs out of money at midnight, March 18th. We're all staring at that deadline, and the House of Representatives have demonstrated clearly that we want to avoid having the President or Harry Reid shut this government down. We want to keep this government functioning in a responsible fashion. But I will say, Mr. Speaker, that functioning in a responsible fashion is not turning a blind eye to $105.5 billion, and it is not wondering where this number came from. This number is in this CRS report. Now, this is a Congressional Research Services report titled Appropriations and Fund Transfers in the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. It's written by C. Stephen Redhead, Specialist in Health Policy, and it's dated February 10, 2011. And in this, now that the numbers are in here, and when you go through and highlight the numbers, we put it into a spreadsheet. This spreadsheet, Mr. Speaker. And this spreadsheet shows the total of all of these automatic appropriations, and they come to $105,464,000,000, and that's over a decade period of time. And this is the minimum. This is the threshold number. It's not the maximum amount that can be spent. Just to give an example, here's one of the items in here of automatic appropriations, self-enacting appropriations, that shows this. $10 billion, no, excuse me, let's see, its total is $10 billion through FY19, but this is Medicare Innovation. Medicare Innovation is funds that goes to Congressional Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS. FY11, it's $1 billion, and it's written in such a way that it's $1 billion every year, and here's the language, in perpetuity, Mr. Speaker. This is one example of Medicare Innovation that gets appropriated automatically, written and hidden into the bill, $1 billion every year for Medicare Innovation that goes on in perpetuity, and it doesn't require an act of Congress. It's not an act of an Appropriations Committee in the 112th Congress that funds the FY 2012 or 11 or any subsequent year. This is the perpetual motion machine that keeps spitting out money, and it'll spit out money forever. It'll spit out money until Congress conducts an affirmative act to shut off this funding. And that's what I sought to do with the amendment that I offered in H.R. 1, which said, patterned off of the Vietnam War Amendment, that said, and I'm going to do this in summary too, notwithstanding any other provision of law, no funds in this act, and no funds in any act no funds in any act previously enacted shall be used to carry out the provisions of, in summary, Obamacare. That language pulls out by the roots everything that's here in this CRS report and shuts off the automatic appropriations. There is an issue also written into Obamacare, another sleight of hand that took place. There are many others, but this one is particularly egregious, that grants the authority to the Secretary of Health and Human Services to do transfers. to fund the implementation of Obamacare essentially at her discretion and probably out of the U.S. Treasury, just to do the automatic appropriations, to grant that kind of authority to a bureaucrat, to circumvent Congress, to set up that authority, a transfer authority which is the equivalent of an appropriations authority that goes on in perpetuity to the Secretary of Health and Human Services, while there's automatic appropriations to the tune of $105.5 billion for a decade that also go on in perpetuity without any, so binding the future Congress in a way that requires an affirmative action on this Congress's part to shut it off. So, Mr. Speaker, where I am is this. I'm done dancing around with all of this. I've looked at it, I've analyzed it, I've joined with some of my colleagues. I thank my colleague Michelle Bachmann for raising this up in the media and doing as much media as she has done over this last week or so. I drove this with all that I had back when we were working on and building up to and passing H.R. 1. I'll continue to do so. We must shut off this funding. We must do it affirmatively, and we need to do it where we have leverage. There's only two places where there's leverage, and that is in the continuing resolution in one place, and the other one is the debt ceiling. But what I've said is that I will vote for no appropriations bill that funds Planned Parenthood. I will vote for no appropriations bill that should be shutting off the funding, the automatic funding, especially to Obamacare. That's where I stand. That's where I will stand. And if enough members of this Congress stand with me, we will put an end to Obamacare, and we need to do so early. We've got a lot of good work to do in this Congress. And we can either look forward to a long, protracted battle, a war of attrition over this that goes on the entire 112th Congress and on through the elections of 2012, including the presidential elections of 2012, or we can pull this tumor out by the roots, this malignant tumor called Obamacare that is metastasizing as we speak while this automatic funding is being poured in and likely being transferred. We can put the brakes on it. We can pull it out by the roots, every bit of it, get rid of it lock, stock, and barrel. That's what we must do. It's our obligation. It's our pledge. And this House has voted to repeal it. This House has voted to unfund it. And every Republican in the House and every Republican in the Senate has voted to repeal Obamacare. Two federal courts have found it unconstitutional. It is irresponsible to tolerate the funding to Obamacare while it goes on our watch, while we have the power to shut it off, and while we understand that it is unconstitutional into the bargain. So, Mr. Speaker, I came to this floor tonight to urge this House to stand together, to write the language into the CR that I ask be written into H.R. 1 so that we can go forward and join with the American people, the supermajority of the American people that have rejected Obamacare, that want their liberty back, that want constitutional legislation coming out of this place. The very reason that there are 87 new freshman Republicans in this House of Representatives, every one of them ran on repeal of Obamacare. Every one of them voted to repeal it. They brought a new mandate here. Many of us have been standing here fighting it. I welcome them, God's gift to America, and I ask all, Mr. Speaker, to join with me. Let's shut off all of this funding to Obamacare, that is in the existing appropriations and that is automatically appropriated, whether some might want to call it mandatory spending. I call it self-enacting automatic appropriations written in a deceptive fashion, must be shut off, and I'll continue to work on this cause with every effort that I have, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate your attention, your indulgence, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Does the gentleman from Iowa wish to move to adjourn?